Chapter 2, Fragments. Ruth seemed to remember quite a lot from those days in spite of her young age. Perhaps it was the trauma of being abandoned that helped to imprint her early years so indelibly in her memory. What follows now is transcribed from Ruth's tape, recorded in 1991. I seemed to be sitting on a potty for hours and hours. I don't know if my little brother Hans was on a pot too. I don't know how old I would be, maybe about 3 years old. I suppose the people who were meant to look after us thought that sitting us on potties was better than dealing with a baby's dirty nappies and a toddler who would have to be helped to the loo all the time. Anyway, there I was, sitting and sitting, holding my dolly. I think I sang to myself a bit. They must have been German nursery rhymes. I always liked singing to myself because I cheered myself up when I sang. Mutti must have been out shopping or maybe at work somewhere or other. Our little apartment, or perhaps it was only one room, I don't know, for my mother had very little money, was above a baker's shop. To me, the windows through which the sun sometimes came down in thin golden strings were very high, way up above my head. I couldn't see out into the street. I think her mother probably asked the people in the bakery to pop up and keep an eye on us from time to time. Warm scents of cinnamon and spices wafted up from the hot ovens below us. Baking bread and cakes permeated the air with tantalizing aromas. I would imagine the taste of warm cinnamon cakes melting on my tongue and freshly baked bread straight from the oven, smothered with salty butter. I think I must have been often hungry. In winter, the ovens in the bakery warmed our room nicely, but in summer it became unbearably hot. Sometimes poor little Hans whimpered, disturbing me, spoiling my daydreams. It seems to me that we were left alone most of the time. It's hard for me to judge now, after all these years. It might not have been so very long, but to a small child, the time without Mutti seems to stretch miserably. I just remember being really terrified whenever anyone came to the door. It would creak slightly as it opened just a crack, and our faces would turn towards it in dreadful anticipation, our eyes straining to see. We'd already be guessing what horror would appear. Were they older children belonging to the baker, teasing us? Or did the baker's wife use a sinister black mask to scare us into behaving? A caricature of an African face with startlingly white eyes and grinning teeth would appear round the door, and a muffled voice would demand, "Are you being good children today?" We were so frightened that we both cried for our mother. That is what stays with me even to this day, the threat of that fearful mask. Yes, we're being very good. Don't let the black man hurt us." "That's all right then. The black man can't hurt little children while they're being good." And the face would disappear. The door would close with a click, and we'd be on our own again until next time. Oh, I didn't dare be naughty or to move from my potty. And I was very relieved when my mother came home for us at last and we were safe again. It's just before Christmas, December 1917. The world is at war. Germany is blockaded. Its citizens, especially its children, are dying of starvation. In Dresden, Clara has come to a decision that will deeply affect her and her children, but could be the means of saving their lives. Accompanied by her sister and the children, she knocks on the door of the children's home in Gruna, and they are all shown into the office of the director, Pastor Spranger. The two women who brought the children into the children's home, known as Goldene Pfort, at 51 Bodenbacher Straße, perch on their chairs, guarding the table on which the two little ones have been placed, so that they don't fall off the edge. The children's mother is painfully thin, poorly dressed and careworn, although Pastor Spranger is surprised to realize she's probably no more than 25 and must have been a pretty girl not so long ago. She's having difficulty meeting his eyes, nervously touching the soft curls that escape from under her felt hat. "They're good children, Pastor, no trouble at all." He wants to ask her why, in that case, is she giving her babies up to him. But he knows the answer. It's all too common a problem in these days of war, inflation, and food shortages. At least the children should be safe from starvation in the children's home, and he would take care of the salvation of their souls, poor mites. But would that be enough? "Are you sure this is the only option open to you, Frau Schmidt?" he asks carefully. "Are your parents not able to assist you, so that you could keep your children at home?" The mother turns to her companion, a smartly dressed, self-assured young woman who speaks for her. "My sister had these children by a Russian Jew, with neither the sanctity of marriage nor the approval of our parents. He has since left the country. Mama and Papa are adamant they will have nothing more to do with her or with these children." Pastor Spranger had heard this kind of story so many times before. Why do girls fall into such temptation? Why didn't young women like this follow their parents' example, especially girls like this one, who is clearly from a good German family? The sister continues. "The children's father was travelling abroad 3 years ago when the war started. She's been on her own since then and has had to work to survive. There is no one to care for the children while she is at work." "I understand." He presses the mother's cold hand between his warm ones. "I can assure you that the children will be well cared for here, Frau Schmidt. Don't worry about them, and you're welcome to visit them as often as you wish." He senses her discomfort. "I think it's very unlikely that it will be often," she says sharply, pulling her hand away. "If it's all right with you, Pastor, I think we'd better leave now." Both women stand. The mother turns to her children. "Ruth, Hans, you must be good children. I need to go to the shop. I forgot to buy Zwieback. Stay here and play until I come back. Ruth, look after your little brother." The pastor watches the children's little faces, smiling, so full of trust, and in spite of his years of experience, he feels an uncomfortable tightness somewhere near his heart. The little girl looks up from under her straight black fringe and takes her brother's hand protectively in her small one. "I like Zwieback, Mutti." "You can sing something, a Christmas song for the pastor while I'm gone." She leans over them, gives each a quick kiss on the top of their heads before hurrying to the door. As they leave, it is the children's aunt who turns to take a last look at her sister's children. They are sitting on the table in their new black velvet clothes, singing "Wenn es Weihnachten ist, wenn es Weihnachten ist," in their high-pitched baby voices. "I remember it so clearly, Chrissy, although I was very young." 10 children sit on a seesaw, each holding on to the shoulders of the child in front. They look over their left shoulders, smiling towards the camera. In the foreground there is a doll and a ball. To the left, a pretty young woman crouches, her dress and long white apron resting on the grass. At the back of the picture sits a man sporting a Santa Claus beard, flanked by two women. A high fence runs along the back of the garden, and beyond it are some trees. It is the summer of 1918. The war is finally over, and the director of the children's home, situated in Parkland, in the leafy Gröna district of Dresden, has called in a local photographer. Frau Gofferier has already taken a photograph of all the staff and children together, which took quite a lot of organising, as the children ranged in age from babies to 13 years old. But Pastor Spranger has asked if she would take another picture of just those children who have siblings in the home. There were 10 of them, 5 pairs of brothers and sisters. The pastor has always considered these to be the luckier ones. Unlike the other children, they're not completely alone. The rest of the children have been herded indoors to get them out of the way, but the older ones, unable to contain their curiosity, are peering out through the high windows, laughing and pulling faces at the children in the garden. The pastor arranges 3 chairs behind the seesaw. He takes the middle one and indicates to the Hausmutter and Tante Freda that they should sit either side of him. Frau Gofferier directs the other aunt, Tante Paula, to crouch down beside the seesaw. She borrows a doll from one of the girls and a ball from one of the boys, placing them on the ground to create interest in the foreground. This, as she knows from experience, will make a more interesting composition. Putting her head under the black cloth, she calls out, "Children, turn to look at me and give me a big smile, and then keep very, very still." 10 little faces turn towards her. The upside-down scene freezes on the plate. The photograph is taken. 10 children tumble off the seesaw, giggling. The Hausmutter's tone is sharp as she calls them to follow her into the building. Pastor Spranger thanks Frau Gofferier and asks how soon she will be able to deliver the photographs. After packing up her equipment, Frau Gofferier shakes the pastor's hand and returns to her studio. As she develops and prints her day's work, she can't help wondering what will become of those poor, abandoned kids when they grow up. Here it is in my hand, nearly 90 years later, a little faded sepia print, with my mother's and my Uncle Hans's baby faces smiling out at me from this particular moment in their childhood. There was somebody, she must have been a wealthy woman, and she came. She was beautiful. She had red hair, and she was for a few days in the children's home. Now, I wonder if she looked for adopting a child. I don't know, but she was with me, and she was alone in the room. I don't know if this was arranged. I feel that perhaps she wanted to come to know me, and perhaps if I had put my hands around her neck or something like this, but I couldn't do that. I wouldn't have dared to do that to anybody, because nobody had done it to me. So I was almost a bit frightened of her, because sometimes she just sort of looked at me, and I could feel it too deep somehow. It gripped me, as if she wanted to love me somehow, and nothing came of it. I don't know how old I was. I must have been terribly small. Still, it's an unusual feeling I had, but it's still in my mind. I liked her because she was so beautiful and she was gentle, and I'm sure she was looking for a child. How Ruth and Hans got on during those first years away from their mother, I hardly know. I do know that Hans missed his mother dreadfully, and although throughout her childhood Ruth had a longing to be back with her mother, she had an independent nature that made the best of any situation in which she found herself. Deep inside herself she must have been a very sad child, but it was probably not too difficult for the staff in the children's home at 51 Bodenbacher Strasse to make her think that on a day-to-day basis she was quite happy, even though she remembered that she was always hungry. She came to believe that she lived in a castle called Rotemund Schloss in Rotemund Park. The rooms and the hallways certainly appeared endlessly large to the little girl, and very grand. The next step after believing that you live in a castle is to believe that you are really a princess, waiting for your prince to rescue you. From a photograph I have of the children's home, it appears to be more of a rather grand house than a castle. It no longer exists, destroyed in February 1945 fire bombings. It's 1919. The war is over. Ruth is 6. It's her first day at school. The other children are all about her age, but most of them are taller and stronger than she is. She feels very small and very shy. Parents of the new class of children stand around laughing and talking with each other. The other children have their grandparents, aunts and uncles there too. Whole families have come to see their little ones starting school. She watches them. She stands alone at the edge of the crowd, a bit frightened. So many grown-ups, but they don't notice her. They're busy with each other and with their children. She watches their laughing faces, listens to their animated chatter. They look nice, she thinks, kind. A woman is taking photographs at the gate. She's seen her before. She came to the children's home once. All the other new pupils have Zuckertüte, sugar cones, large cones made of cardboard and filled with gifts given to children by their parents to sweeten their first day at school. Big, colourful cones, almost as tall as the children themselves. Parents give them to their children on their first day at school. Some of the luckier children have 2 or even 3, all wonderfully decorated and brimming with lovely things. Ruth tries to imagine what might be in them. Sweets, chocolates, pencils and pencil boxes, hair ribbons, handkerchiefs. But she knows there won't be one for her. The other children pose for photographs, holding their Tüte, smiling proudly. She feels left out, alone, but her chest is tight with excitement all the same. The words, "Today I start school, today I start school," keep running through her head. She stands nervously at the edge of the crowd, watching, waiting. At last they're asked to line up, the shortest child at the front, the tallest bringing up the rear. Ruth is the shortest. She is the leader. She proudly follows the teacher into her school, her head held high, and all the other children follow her. They're taken to their classrooms, and each child is allocated a desk. What made a huge impression on me was the ink pot brimming with black ink. It had a bitter smell that was strange, exciting. I'd never seen such a thing before. Their teacher is a handsome young man with dark hair and soft brown eyes. He introduces himself. "I am Herr Engel, Mr. Angel. I have fallen from the sky and broken my wings, so I can't fly back." She can hardly breathe. She stares at him. Is it true? Ruth believes passionately the angels are watching over her. He is so beautiful, so beautiful. It must be true. "So I've decided to come to this new class," he is saying, "and I will be your teacher for the next 8 years until my wings grow back again." Suddenly it doesn't seem to matter that she came here alone, that she has no mama, no papa, no Zuckertüte. Her teacher is an angel. An angel! "He was the first real man in my life. He taught me all through 8 years of my schooling. I adored him." Now it's 1920. Germany is suffering from reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. The children's home depends on the goodwill of local tradesmen to supply food as cheaply as possible. The butcher sends meat of such poor quality that he wouldn't be able to sell it to anyone else. The greengrocer rids himself of old vegetables, the baker of stale flour. There is a gnawing emptiness in her. In spite of Pastor Spranger's former optimism, food in the children's home is poor and scarce. After breakfast, each child's bowl is decorated around the rim with inedible husks from the rough porridge. At supper, cold globules of fat congeal on dishes, while tough bean strings decorate the plate edges like green filigree frames. The children leave the table with unsatisfied stomachs. In late summer, they scavenge rose hips and hawthorn berries from hedgerows they pass on their way home from school, worrying at the hard berries, trying to satisfy the ravaging need of their growing bodies. In autumn, they find windfalls from apple and plum trees that grow close enough to the garden walls to drop their bounty into the street. Winter months are bleak, when city streets provide nothing in the way of free food for hungry children. Occasionally, one of Ruth's school friends shares her packed lunch with her. It doesn't happen often. Usually, she sits nibbling at the thin black treacle sandwich provided by the children's home, watching her friends as they eat their sandwiches lovingly made by their mothers. Sandwiches of fine rye bread stuffed with leberwurst and pickled cucumber. On hot summer days, her treacle sandwich mutates into a piece of dry, curled leather. Unappetizing, it's only partially satisfied the ever-present hunger. Around this time, a baby comes to the children's home, Gretel Opala, who is no more than 2 years old. Ruth is often asked if she could help with the babies in the nursery. She loves babies and enjoys looking after them. She thinks Gretel is very special. Ruth adores her and pours all her childish love into that baby girl. The baby cries and cries, but nobody takes any notice. Instead of taking her to a doctor, they smack her and give her to 7-year-old Ruth to look after. I was feeding her. They gave me rolls soaked in warm milk and sugar to feed her with. I ate lots of it. I ate it away from her. I was only a child, only a starving little child. You mustn't trust a starving child to feed a baby. It's stupid. The baby cries and cries, and then she dies. And the people in the children's home take the grieving 7-year-old Ruth to the mortuary to see the dead baby. The little thing was lying there, like glass, a little waxy. It was as if a butterfly had left its chrysalis, and that was a child lying there. I hope Ruth didn't brood about it when she was a child, but I know that as an adult she wondered if it was her fault that Gretel died. Even in her 80s she was upset, both for Gretel and for herself, the malnourished little girl she once was. When you were born, you looked at me so seriously with the same big blue eyes, and I wondered if you were Gretel come back to me.